Your dream scenario, what are you? I'm a professional baseball player, or I am a chemist, or I am a pharmacist, or I am president, or whatever the case may be. Writer was my big long-term dream. But I never actually dreamt I would get to do it. And still, I would spend a lot of time in the fantasy of, okay, well, when I'm a famous writer, this is going to be the kind of desk that I'm going to have. I did all these things to kind of prepare for my famous writer life. But you know what I didn't do? I didn't write. Do you guys see how that might be a problem? So it's kind of like saying, when I win an Olympic gold medal, but you don't play any sports. And so I finally reached the point a few years ago where I thought, okay, it's time to do something about this. So I made myself a deal that I had to write something. It didn't have to be great. It didn't have to be long. It didn't have to get published. It didn't have to win an award. It just had to exist. And this is something that I think a lot of young people or a lot of aspiring writers don't realize, is that it's the long game. And whatever you write first, I hate to break it to you, it's not going to be that good. Writing and starting to write is a little bit like turning on a garden hose you haven't used in a really long time. When you turn on a garden hose that has been sitting there basically unused all winter, what comes out first is going to be rusty water. It's going to have dirt in it, maybe some gravel. It's just going to be not good water. But it doesn't stay that way. The only way to get to the clean water is to let the water run. And so I think most writers have to get the dirty water out first. And so I gave myself permission to write the dirty water, to get it out of my system. So, I went down and I bought another dollar notebook over and over again until I had told a whole story. Then the process was you have to put it in the computer and rewrite it and make the story good. Now, one of the hardest things about anything really, but especially writing, is knowing if it's good or not. I don't know. I've lost all perspective about this. I wanted to get an independent, opinion, so I entered it into a contest. And I made myself a deal. If I won the contest, then I just had to start the process of trying to get it published. If I didn't win the contest, I would take that as a sign I wasn't ready yet. And so I actually won the contest, and I was actually kind of bummed about that because I had no idea what I was doing, and I was a little bit afraid. So at that, I was now to the point where, let's say you've had a crush on somebody for a really, really, really long time. I was to the point I had to ask that person to the prom. It was time to put it into action. I had to put myself out there and really take a chance. I want to find out what their submission standards are. And then you need to follow those rules exactly. So you follow the directions. You do as they tell you to do. Then it gets really hard. Then it is a matter of, I didn't like this, but somebody else might like it. Then it's, to go back to the prom analogy, it is the, I'm already going with someone, but that was really nice of you. Thank you for asking. Or, I'm going to be out of town that weekend. Or I just don't like you. Or you get the, I would go with you, but I just don't want to. There are lots of differing degrees of no. And so, but eventually, hopefully, if you're writing at a professional level, someone will say yes. So people ask me all the time, how hard is it to get a literary agent? And my answer is, if you've written a professional level book, it's not that hard. But writing a professional level book is hard. So that's why the writing is always what should come first. Watching it, it was really, really great. And there was an episode that kind of was a flashback episode of when some of the adult female spies were teenagers. And so I was just kind of watching out of the corner of my eye, and I see this, and my very first thought was, did she go to a boarding school for spies? And I turn up the volume, and it's not that. It's a stupid orphanage. And I was like, why are you having an orphanage when you could be having boarding school for spies? People, this is a lost opportunity, because you got to wonder, in boarding school for spies, maybe for PE, you rappel out of black helicopters, and then you have to kill a man with a piece of uncooked spaghetti, Maybe everybody gets poisoned in science class, and either you create an antidote or you die. And that's how you know if you failed, because you died. And you're like, what is boarding school for spies like? And so I thought, I have to write this, because the good thing about Alias not doing it was that I could do it. So I immediately sat down and I told Kristen, okay, I think it's going to be called I Tell You I Love You, but then I'd have to kill you. And it's about a girl who goes to a boarding school for spies. And Kristen immediately wrote me back and said, yes, that's it. Ding, 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 we got it. And not to be all super cheesy or anything, but it was really a big turning point in my life. Everything changed at that point because the book sold for a decent amount of money and it became pretty popular right out of the gate, and just wild, crazy things kept happening. But I kept my day job because I'm very risk averse. And so one day I'm at my day job and I'm actually driving home from a meeting, because I used to drive a lot. And I knew obviously, you know, I'm writing this really high intense political atmosphere, so I have to write a political thriller. I thought, oh, it has to be about a teenager because they're so much more interesting than grown-ups. I thought, what would, you know, and also a cool thing about being a teenager, at least from my perspective, is that you guys see things and you hear things and you look at things differently. But a lot of times adults don't take you seriously. And so what would happen if a teenager saw something or knew something and none of the officials would actually do anything about it? And so that's how I came up with the character of Grace. And when Grace was 13, she actually saw her mother murdered. And as if that isn't bad enough, now nobody believes her. So they keep telling her, okay, it was dark, it was traumatic, it was a long time ago, you were young. You absolutely did not see a man with a scar on his face shoot and kill your mother. There is no scarred man. But for 3 years, Grace has been telling them differently. Now it's 3 years later, she's 16. She has to move in with her grandfather, who is the U.S. ambassador to a small European country. And she's moving onto a street where Russia is their next door neighbor. Iran is at the end of the street. And they sit her down and they say, you can't cause trouble here. You just can't. And she's like, I'm good. I'm going to eat my vegetables. I'm going to floss my teeth. I'm going to go to bed on time. I am never going to say the word scarred man ever, ever again. And then who does she see? The scarred man. And now she knows her mother's killer is real. She knows he's there. And worst of all, she knows he's going to kill again. So, you know, so much of my career trajectory is 100% out of my hands and always will be. And that's, for a control freak like me, that's really, really hard. How long does it take me to write a novel, and how often do I write? Good questions. And the answer to both is it depends. So I have written a novel. The first novel I ever wrote, I probably wrote in maybe 4 or 5 weeks, but I was only working on the weekends. So I'd sit down in the afternoon on a Saturday afternoon and write like 50, 60 pages. I was young and stupid and I didn't know better. And I had no idea what I was doing, and it was just fun. And now that I've been doing this for a while, I sit down and I write and I doubt everything. You know, oh, there was that Amazon review that said I used too many commas. Is that comma right? You know, whatever. So it gets a little harder for me with every book. How often do I write? It depends where I am in the deadline schedule. So like right now I'm touring. I may try to get a little work done while I'm traveling, but I have no illusions of thinking I'm actually going to be very productive. When I get home, I'm going to double down, and I'm going to have to work really hard every day for a week or so and turn something in real fast. So it just depends on where I'm at with each book. And how do I create characters, and do I have inspiration from real life? So characters are very much the center of most stories. And if you change the character, you change the story. So if Harry Potter isn't about an orphan who lost his parents, what is that story about? Okay, you can still have an evil wizard that's out to get Harry, but the overall trajectory of those books looks really, really different if Harry's parents are still alive. So you change fundamental things about a character, you change the world, you change the plot, you change pretty much everything. So with Gallagher Girls, for example, it really started with Cami. Well, it started with the idea of a boarding school for spies. And then several years ago, I don't even know if this is true or not, but at some point, someone told me, or I heard, that all of the actors who have ever played James Bond in the movies would not be allowed to have that job in real life. That MI6, which is kind of the British version of the CIA, they have very strict rules about you can't be too tall, and you can't be too short, and you can't be too attractive, because they don't want spies who walk into a room and everybody turns and looks at them, right? You want the spy that's the person nobody is going to see and nobody is going to remember. And so really good spies are chameleons. And so my heroine, her name is Cammie the Chameleon. That's her nickname because she's the girl nobody sees. And so that's very much how the fact that Cammie was the chameleon was always the center, the cornerstone of that character, and in turn, really the books. With Grace in Embassy Row, Grace was probably my favorite character. She's the character I've written that most badly needs a hug. Grace has had a really hard life. And really the cornerstone of that character was I needed it to be someone who'd cried wolf. So that when she got to the embassy, when she saw or heard about this terrible thing that was going to happen, nobody would believe her. And so I actually got on the phone with Holly Black, who is amazing, love Holly. And we were talking about this, and she said, okay, tell me about this girl. And I said, oh, well, I think she moves in with her, she has to move on to the embassy. And she says, okay. And she says, why? I'm like, oh, okay. So she moves into the embassy, I think because she's going to live with her grandfather. And Holly's like, okay, interesting. Why can't she live with mom and dad? And I hadn't thought really about any of this. I'm just kind of talking from the gut. And I said, I think her dad's in the Army. I think he's been deployed somewhere. What advice would I give someone aspiring to be a writer? Definitely read as much as you can and write as much as you can. One of the things that I see a lot that kind of bothers me and makes me worry is I'll hear from readers, or I'll meet them at places like today, and they'll come up to me and they'll say, I'm a writer, I'm writing a book, I have to have it published before I graduate from high school. And my answer to that is why? Why the deadline? Because these things, it's not expiring. It's going to go on for a really long time. And so I think you have a lot of young people who rush to get published. You rush to go pro. And my advice would be to enjoy your amateur status as long as you possibly can.